All right. Hello, everybody. I'm here today with John Astin, who's a friend of mine and a spiritual communicator, an explorer of what is a singer-songwriter, a psychologist. John's a really interesting guy. We met as a result of both being deep appreciators of Peter Brown, and I've really enjoyed exploring John's work in the time since then. And John has a new book that'll be coming out soon called In Every Wave, The Entirety of the Sea. So we're going to talk a bit about John's book today and just talk about yoga, the practice of exploring reality and what could be discovered through such an exploration. And so I thought maybe a good starting point, John, would be to ask you, what is the value of exploring reality in the way that you talk about it?
Well, I guess the first thing I'd say is it seems that we are curious creatures by nature as humans. And I know I have a daughter, and I remember when she was really little, like right out of, when she, especially as she developed language, but, even earlier, there was just this, like, what is this? She would encounter the world around her. And there was this natural curiosity, like she would see something. What is this? What is this, Daddy? And I remember marveling at that. Um, putting this in more kind of transcendental terms, it seems like this intelligence of life, that's taken form as us, is just inherently curious. It's exploring. Um, it's exploring itself, exploring its nature through all the different. Right now we're having a conversation, we could say, but another way to understand that is life is exploring itself, is looking into itself, and um, so number one, all these investigations that I write about and teach and invite others into, um, for me, it's like first and foremost, it's about encouraging or inviting a kind of curiosity about like, we have all this language, right, to seemingly describe the world around us. We have all dictionaries filled with words that suggest we have some understanding of what things are, but have we really stopped to ask a question like, what is actually going on? Like, what is this experience? Yes, I have many ways to describe it, but do I actually know what it is? I'm always astounded when I ask that question when I'm working with people, because it's sort of, it's like the question almost shocks me, because I realize how infrequently we stop to ask that question. It's almost like this assumption, like we already know what's going on. Yeah, I'm a human being living a life. Like, I know what's going on. But even the most basic thing about us is our existence, right? The fact that we exist. But what is life? I mean, do we know what it is? It's a really profound question. It's maybe the most basic question. And so, so that's the first thing I'd say in response to your question about, to kind of let this kind of natural curiosity kind of come alive in you, and get curious about, like, what's going on, and let me investigate that. It just so happens that that brings about tremendous benefits in our human lives, and I would say, I guess, most simply, so much of what we might describe as human suffering is being defined into existence. That, for example, we could encounter a certain state like anxiety that we would label as anxiety. And, this is almost become like epidemic, and particularly in certain age groups, this experience of anxiety. And then as humans, we take all these steps to try to lessen that anxiety, maybe eliminate it altogether through pharmacology or various types of therapy or even spiritual practices. But what is anxiety as an actual experience? Like, what is that? And through that exploration, we might discover something quite interesting, which is many of the experiences well, ultimately all of them, but that we think of as problematic, as requiring some fix, some resolution, from one perspective at least, are not the problems we imagine them to be at all. And that the discovery of that is brings with it a sense of a kind of freedom from a certain lessening, I guess, of suffering, of human suffering, and with it, greater enjoyment of reality. So that's a pretty good payoff, you know, less suffering, more enjoyment.
Yeah, beautiful. Uh, yeah, one thing that comes up for me when I tune into that question is just, for one, I just find it fun to explore reality. I find it fun to play with these different ways that reality can be with itself, ways it can seem to be. I just find it astonishing, all the different modes. And so it's awe-inspiring. It brings forth so much more juiciness, voluptuousness, and radiance in day-to-day experience, and gradually seems to reveal this felt experience of wholeness and non-separation, which seems to be really connected to coming to a place where you just feel at home in reality, and you feel like you actually belong here and you're not apart from reality. You're actually just able to rest as reality. And that for me, I would say, is one of the most beautiful things that this type of exploration can, uncover. And when it is uncovered, you see that it was always there. It's not like something new emerges that wasn't there. It's just a sensitive noticing where you increasingly see that, oh, I've always been home. I've always been this wholeness.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that search for a sense of fulfillment, a sense of completion, a sense of wholeness that's very universal, it would seem, in the human. Um, through exploring reality outside of what we think it is, more conventionally, what we imagine it to be based on our descriptive frameworks, we can discover, just as you said, that wholeness is the very nature of this. There's one thing here, and that's wholeness. That's wholeness. And so that's never absent. It's not something that needs to be acquired. It's not something that really needs to be practiced, but it can just be discovered to be the case that um, this fullness of life is exactly what's here in every moment, and we're simply an expression of that vastness, that fullness, that wholeness. So that's the great good news, and it's available. It can be discovered by looking.
And it just occurs to me too to say that when I'm talking about the fun of exploring all these modes, it might make people think that I'm talking about like peak experiences or, flashbang grenades, explosive experiences. But I'm really just saying that this exploration begins to reveal that the most simple, ordinary, mundane moments, like me looking at a pond or eating a slice of pizza, those moments are begin to be illuminated as utterly rich, utterly luscious, utterly bottomless, and bottomless poetry in every direction. And so it's you start to discover that it's not about reaching some special state or some other place, but that, God's poetry or whatever you want to call this cosmic artistry is just ever present, and we can just check it out whenever we want.
Yeah, I think that's really key, Jordan. That mm, I suffered for a long time under the innocent misperception that what I was searching for was a kind of a special state that I could, if I did enough practice, I could eventually get myself into, and then that eureka, I would have it. But it's freedom is that's not freedom. That's basically a kind of conditioning of what we're looking for, what we're searching for, conditioning it upon the presence of certain states, right? And I like to say that the people have all sorts of states, through meditation practice, through all sorts of things, through sometimes, pharmaceutical aids of one kind or another. They all have what they think of as special experiences, that feel important somehow. And not to deny that, but I like to say that the most special experiences that we could ever have, or insights, are the ones that reveal the specialness of all experience. Those are the ones to really pay attention to. That show us, like, oh, what you're seeing right now in this moment of awakening, or some sort of recognition of something more primal about this, that what you're seeing is inherent to all experience. It's not tied to that particular moment. Do you know what I mean? It's like, just as you said, it's like we might describe this as a relatively normal moment, an ordinary moment of sitting yet again, having a conversation on Zoom, as we're all become quite familiar with post pandemic. And but no, what's actually transpiring here is infinite. It's infinite. It's not, in that sense, it's extraordinary beyond extraordinary. It's wondrous beyond wonder. And um it's that you ask, why even engage in these inquiries, what's the potential benefit of it? And well, that's a pretty big benefit, to start to realize that our everyday normalcy is filled with this endless richness and vitality and astonishment, if we get curious and start to look at it. Because that's one of the things about our describing of reality, which is obviously like a useful thing. Here it is, this rendering of reality conceptually and linguistically. It's beautiful, but it has a tendency to make it seem like it's less than it is. Make it seem, that's part of how it functions in a way, is it takes all of this infinite detail and complexity and richness and kind of simplifies it, right? To make it, I guess, more manageable, like collapsing the territory into a map, right? So it makes it manageable. Like, okay, so now I kind of have a sense of what's going on. I have I have kind of a schematic to capture this, and maybe that's useful to have that. But I mean, even look, like I say, like a simple moment like this of having a conversation, like, could you actually draw out a schematic to characterize what's actually going on right now? It's impossible, right? I mean, every little sliver of the experience is itself a whole universe. And that's available to discover. And the discovery of that is, to say that it's life enriching is it's not saying it strongly enough,
Yeah, one way it showed up for me as you were talking is that the most special experience is the one you're having right now. And that's always the case. It's just,
Yeah,
that's the only real contact point. The only real contact point with reality is the present experience. Whether you had a crazy peak experience, that's already gone. But this is fresh. This is alive. This is the knife's edge.
I know. It's one of the reasons why I'm really not very interested in, and you see this in some spiritual circles, not infrequently, of people talking about their awakening experiences and their big experiences. And that's fine. I mean, it's not that I don't like those conversations somehow, or that I see them as problematic per se, but I was just talking to someone. I work with people individually too around this stuff, and I was sharing this with them. I said, what I'm interested in is not what might have happened, some big moment, but what's happening now. And this is the moment of awakening. Like, here it is. I don't have to talk about some moment of awakening that happened a week ago or 10 years ago. Like, who cares about that? It's like, no, here is the moment, completely awake. And notice that. And then you realize the awakening is always what's happening.
Hmm. Yeah, what could be more awake than awakeness? A world,
That's right.
a world is a
It's
period.
it's funny to I mean, it's so powerful to see that. I mean, it's just, here is the moment, what we call the moment, and its presence the seeming existence of what we call the moment is its illumination, is it showing up, right? And that's by any other name is that's the wakefulness. Like here it is. And wow, that's amazing. The miracle. The
Yeah.
miracle is always what's happening.
Mm. It sure is. And yeah, I wanted to read some quotes from your forthcoming book here.
By
In
the way, it's no longer forthcoming. It's already out.
Oh, it's
So
out.
I got other people were getting the book before I got it. I ordered a bunch of copies, so I could have some. And but I just got them a couple days ago. So yeah, it's already out. So
Awesome. Awesome. In every wave, the entirety of the sea. That's an amazing title. Maybe we should start there and ask what does that title mean to you?
yeah, I like that title too. Well, there's a couple different things to say about it. One is, there's a picture of a wave on the cover, and not surprisingly, and if you look at I don't know if you can see this. I don't know if this is just going to be on audio or video, but if you are seeing it in video, you can see the wave there, and it's interesting because it's so paradoxical. Like we can look at an ocean. You and I could sit by the shore and watch the waves rolling in, and we could talk about the waves as things, right? That can be talked about, like a phenomena. There's the wave, and wow, watch it do its thing. But there's another way to look at what's going on, which is to realize there are no waves because it's like saying, in other words, where does the wave begin? Well, the beginning of the wave is the ocean, and in that sense, there's no, as Buddhists would say, the wave doesn't have any independent existence. It looks like it does, but it doesn't actually have it because there's just an ocean there moving, you could say, moving. And so when in every wave, so-called wave, is the entirety of the sea because there's no separation. When you look at some part of reality, so-called, you're looking at reality. You're looking at the whole of reality because there's only the whole of reality. That's what the title means. I mean, another way I'll sometimes talk about this is that um, kind of the holographic nature of reality, right? Like in the sense that not that it's like a hologram, but more that if you're a Star Trek fan and you remember the holodeck on Star Trek, where they could, if they wanted to go spend some time in the holodeck, they could program the holodeck to take them to whatever London. So they go have tea in London. So they go into the holodeck, and it looks like they're in London, and that there's a restaurant there, and they go to have tea in the restaurant. But it's all a hologram, right? There's not actually any of those things there, but it looks like they are, and it's all made of the whatever holograms are made of. And so every point in that hologram is the entirety because there's just one thing. Or a dream is another thing, right? Like there's the character. I had this very complex dream last night, and it was wild. And wow, all this stuff going on. I was in this house and these people that I knew and important people in my life. But any part of that dream that I touched as a seemingly separate thing, phenomena, I was touching the entirety of the dream because there's just the entirety of the dream. It's just one thing.
Yeah, beautiful. I think Peter Brown, our mutual friend, said one time something like, if you touch any point on the continent of Africa, you're touching the entire continent of Africa. It's like if you're in Johannesburg, what you're seeing is the entirety of Africa in a sense, because there's no division. So that's another possible
Yeah,
metaphor or access point. Like this is the whole universe right here because there's no
right.
separation.
No, there's no edges. Exactly. You lie down in your backyard on the ground and you're touching earth, the whole of earth, because there's only the wholeness of earth. There's no dividing lines.
Mm, beautiful. Um, a first quote that I'll read here that I think strikes quite to the core of a lot of what you talk about is from the book. Experience is simply too vast, too multidimensional, and too transient to ever be pinned down conceptually. So I wonder what that brings up for you in this moment. And yeah, and the word multidimensional is interesting. Maybe you can touch on that.
Right. Well, like if someone were to say, well, what are you doing right now? Let's say one aspect of what I'm doing that I could describe seemingly would be that I'm sitting on a chair. There's a chapter in my previous book, This Extraordinary Moment. I'm now thinking about it. The title of the chapter is Sitting on a Chair Isn't Merely Sitting on a Chair. And this is what I'm pointing to in that quote you just read from this book, that what's happening experientially, that consciousness is rendering or describing as sitting on a chair. That's basically taking this infinity of phenomena that are present and collapsing that into something describable, essentially. But if you go back to what the description, okay, sitting on a chair. So what's actually happening that I call sitting on a chair? Well, I could take one tiny part of that, like the feeling I would describe as my butt on the cushion, okay, of the chair. So, okay, so that's an experience. What's actually there? Well, I'm going to go explore that experientially. I'm not going to answer it analytically. I'm going to try to answer it experientially. What's there? Wow. Like you're down the rabbit hole really fast, aren't you? Because it's like these tingling, you could call them sensations, but you know, it's like this sparkling, this shimmering. I mean, there's no words, right? Like what's actually there? And whatever's there are like these little sparkles of tingling, just feel those. And you're just, where are you now? You're in some, like I said, multi-dimensional. It's like you could say that's a sensation, but what does that even mean? It's like you're just gone. You're gone. You're not gone, but you're just you start to lose the reference points for what anything is because you start entering into the endlessness of experience that I say, like if you likened your experience to water, a body of water, and a fixed finite body of water would be like a swimming pool that's got edges, right? So if I'm swimming around the pool, eventually I'll get to the edge of the pool, I'll hit the wall of the pool, and I've come to the end of the swimming pool, right? But our experience is not like that, is it? I never hit a wall. I never come to the end. If I start to explore this experience of sitting on a chair, it seems pretty simple. Sitting on a chair, what's the big deal? But it's like as I start to explore what's happening, it's a body of water that has no wall, it has no final endpoint. As I explore my experience, I just never get to the bottom of it. I never get to the end of it. And it's remarkable, You think about something like, you're sitting in the room and you say, well, this is a room. But exactly how many details make up this room in terms of like little bits of, you could say the pixels of experience, like the details, all the little shapes and colors and shadows. And each one of those, I enter into that and there's more detail there and more detail there. And so this is what I mean by experience is too multidimensional, too infinite to be able to collapse it into some finite idea of what it is, some conclusion about what it is. And in that quote, I also highlight that not only is there too much detail, but the detail itself is ever changing, right? So the very second we think we've collapsed reality into some description, it's already become something else. It's a shapeshifter. So almost more than anything, I think that's the simplest way to discover the way in which reality is inconceivable, because go ahead and try to conceive it right now. And the mind is too slow to do that, right? It tries to grasp hold of it conceptually and it slips away and seems to become something else. And it's so funny because that can sound like, wow, that's so philosophical and metaphysical, but it's actually very empirical, isn't it? It's literally like the feeling of the moment has no endurance to it, has no stability, has no continuity, which is amazing because we sort of are operating under the premise that there's something that has continuity, which is why I can name it, because as a thing, as an experience that, right, seems to have a certain staying power. Um, but if we look, we can discover that it doesn't. It just there's no continuity to anything actually.
It's kind of like from one perspective or from one mode, there is continuity, right? In a sense, from one kind of gross perspective, this pen is persisting across time, and I know the pen's still going to be there in 5 seconds, and I can pick it up and write something with it. And
Mhm.
so I feel like that's a valid mode. In that mode, experientially, things are persistent through time. But what you're pointing at is like when you start to zoom in and you get more subtle and you really be with the kind of subtle buzzing energy that everything is made of, or you look really closely at anything, you look experientially at anything. In one sense, this book of yours is a persistent object through time. But if I move the book like this, it reveals that the book looks different in every moment, right? The experience of the book is actually continually shape shifting and morphing. And I can call this a book persisting through time. I can experience that way. I can experience it that way, or I can experience it as an ever morphing blob of phenomena that I have no idea what it is. And so it's kind of like both of those modes
Well, it's funny because
simultaneously.
any way you or I might come to know the object, the supposed object called the book, any way you might come to know it is going to be based on experience. Visually, you can look at the book. Tactily, you can hold it in your hand. You can thumb through the pages. Um, if you hid the book, you could think about it. You could remember it. You could have it in your mind's eye, the image of it. Any of those ways that you could know this phenomena of that you're calling book would be experience. And as experience, there actually is not any continuity to that thing with called the book. It's in every nanosecond, the experience of the thing has no. It's not the same. Our friend Peter said, one time, Peter Brown, about like, well, how does it seem that there's continuity? And he said, well, I think he's speculating, but one way he described it was it's like the refresh rate is so fast, seemingly, like it's like refreshing itself, but it's literally it makes sense to think about it that way only because how is it that we could see any forms when the perception of the moment is gone as soon as it arises? Like, well, how is it that it looks like there's some continuity to you from moment to moment? I mean, it makes no sense in a way, except that it's like it keeps um, somehow that sense of continuity is created by consciousness. It's magical, but because experientially, again, there's a chapter in the book, the new book called like writing your name on water, and this is a metaphor that's used in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition to describe this lack of continuity. I love that. I love the metaphor so much because it's so visceral. Because you can imagine writing your name in water, right? Like, so we both have the first letter. Our first letter is the same, John and Jordan. So it's like you imagine you're writing a cursive J. There's the lake, and you take your finger and you start writing the J, right? And you see it's so trippy because you see the letter J, it's starting to take shape. But as you're moving your finger on the water, that as it's taking shape, it's disappearing at the same time. So it never actually takes shape. That's why you can't really write your name on water. And this is what the moment feels like. It seems like it's taking shape. And in a sense, as experience, like you said, we experience, here's the shape of the book. Like I can hold it in my hands. So don't tell me it hasn't taken shape. Here it is. It's like it's taken shape. But if we look a little bit more carefully, a little more sensitively, we can discover the other side of the coin, which is the shapeless, the formless, that dances as all the forms, but is fundamentally ungraspable as a form, like a fixed form.
Mm. Yeah, and you said the object can only ever be known through experience, which then raises the question, what is experience? And can experience be found to be anything whatsoever?
Well, it's weird, because like all these words we could use to sort of reduce reality to one thing, like we could call it experience, we could call it being, we could call it the isness, you hear people say we could call it existence, we could call it reality, all, or we could call it, it's all energy, subtle energy. But all those reductions, they're really powerful, to start to touch the primal, sameness of everything. Um, Beg the question, well, okay, well, what is being? What is subtle energy? What is experience? I don't know. I mean, I never would have guessed when I got interested in all this spiritual seeking stuff as a 19-year-old that where all of these investigations would have ultimately led was to no final conclusion. I never would have guessed that. But that's where it seems to have headed. So it's like, oh, I actually can't know, which turns out to be in some interesting way, like liberating to feel the freedom of no, no box that this will fit into. Because there's no bondage, because there's no thing to be bound.
Yeah, just nowhere to land. The Son of Man has no place to rest his head, and that is the pure fluidity. That
It
allows the endless drifting through the endless modes and fully appreciating every mode as being fully it, rather than like, oh, I need to find and crystallize and freeze this absolute state of abiding non-dual awareness.
I tried to do that for a long time. I wore myself out.
Yeah.
I was unable to sustain anything. And somehow my thick skull just like kept thinking, no, I can sustain this. It was like, really? Just look at reality. It's not, nothing is sustainable, but you don't need to sustain it because, here it is. It's like there's nothing to sustain. It's like it's just this why would we need to sustain anything? This is the seeming the idea that I need to sustain something is to sort of privilege certain expressions over others, right? Oh, this is the really good one. I need to sustain this. It's like, well, we're just shit out of luck when it comes to trying to sustain anything.
It reminds me of another quote of yours where you said something like, the effort to sustain a certain type of awareness is like trying to light a match in the presence of the sun. And it's just like, you don't need to light the match because this is already the sun. So just,
It's amazing, isn't it? I swear to God, like how, I mean, if any of your listening audience has meditated before or meditates now, it's like I did for a long time. And I really was trying to generate this like state of awareness, and keep it alive, keep it, sustain it, right? Through the practice. And it's like, oh man, like, wow, it's self-sustaining, isn't it? In the sense that it's the illumination of the moment is effortlessly here, springing forth as each instant, not because I'm sitting on the cushion making that happen. It's just, here it is. It's like, wow. And, I don't know, I can't really say what that is, but there's something about seeing that is powerful. What is that? I haven't really stopped to try to analyze why that's so powerful, but um, I don't know. It feels like you're touching I don't know. Why try to analyze it? It just feels that way.
yeah,
It feels like sanity. It feels like sanity somehow.
mm. And just the effortlessness. It's like you just notice that
Yeah.
you're not the one creating the universe. You're not the one shining this
Yeah.
forth into being. It's spontaneously doing itself in a profound sense. I mean, and when
Yeah.
you notice that, you just realize that you are along for the ride in a profound sense, swept up in this absolute hurricane. And it's like, where did
Yeah.
this mystery come from? And how is it
Yeah.
self-generating this endless activity?
And as you said earlier when we were talking about that feeling of coming home, trying and coming home to the ground, to the sense of well-being, to the sense of ease, to the sense of all those things we long for in a sense. Yeah, it feels like when you touch, like, wow, this is already here. This moment, this being, this existence, it's already here effortlessly, as you said. It's inclusive of everything. It shines forth as everything. Well, that's home. So it's the home of this, the only thing that exists. And it's the great freedom, the great relief of, oh my God, I have to do something to grasp hold of this freedom, this well-being, this goodness, and then hold it in place once I've secured it, and ward off, defend against, brace against all the potential threats to it. That's the normal kind of thing we're engaged with as humans, of trying to kind of rearrange our circumstances and experiences so that we can find well-being. And it's like, what if well-being was found in the flow of reality itself? That's a really different way of experiencing well-being. It's not tied to particular states. It's the very basis of every state, the very basis of every experience.
Yeah, this discussion of states is just making me think about how so much of spirituality places these carrots on a stick on the ever receding horizon, and they play upon a human's feelings of kind of not enoughness or unworthiness or shame in a way. They kind of hook into that and they make you feel like I'm not enough as I am. This definitely isn't it right now. One day when I attain this state, or the popular one nowadays is, with the Neo Advaita community, is like one day when myself completely falls away and I realize that I'm just no one and there's nothing here, then I'll finally know liberation. And I feel like my journey is just leading me toward a place of like burn down all the carrots on the sticks. Just if unconditional freedom required a condition of zero selfing to be unconditionally free, then it wouldn't be unconditional freedom. It's like there's no requirement, there's no conditions for this. There's no checklist. You don't need to check any boxes. It's a done deal. This is unconditional freedom right now. It can't be pinned down into any condition or any box. And it's fully okay if it's looking like selfing, or if it's looking like no selfing, or if it's looking like infinite multidimensionality, or if it's looking like a world, or if it's looking like your family. That's all it.
Yeah, beautifully said. That's right. It's it can and does look like everything, and then that's real freedom. Because otherwise, like you say, then if we're having certain experiences where now we imagine that somehow the wholeness is absent, I mean, logically, that doesn't even make any sense. It would be like if certain waves are appearing, somehow the ocean has gone away. It's like, no, the ocean doesn't go away because there's only the ocean of existence. So it's unbreakably itself. And it's the ultimate empowerment, I think, also to see that, right? Because it's like, it's, this is the ever flowing, nourishing source of existence itself. It's never absent. It's like, it's the potency of life. It's like, that's pretty empowering. It's what you are and what everything is in every moment. It's like never absent. It's like, wow, a very different feeling in that sense of like, I'm somehow the victim of life, potentially, or actually. Like life is somehow happening to me. Sometimes I like it. Sometimes it's awful. And I am having to feel like I'm protecting myself, guarding myself, defending myself. Um, Yeah, it's a vantage point, like you say. I mean, it's accessible to us. We know it well, that perspective, that mode, that way of perceiving. And it's also part of the wholeness too. But there's another perspective that's available, it would seem, which is to realize like, wow, from this other vantage, it's like I'm not this little piece of life that could be crushed by life. I actually am life. And wow, what's the felt sense of that is very different, isn't it? Very different. And even when we're in the perspective that, oh my God, I'm going to be crushed by life, is not actually the case. But the sense of it is, and then it seems to be a certain way, and then it's like then we're suddenly seemingly living in this reality of like, oh my God, danger at every turn, potential threat at every turn, and that kind of vigilance. And I teach graduate students in psychology, and I just I feel like I have this window into suffering in a way as they keep journals in my classes. And um, while I see these themes, like people want to feel like their life is in control and things are predictable. I'm teaching a stress class right now, and it's like they get stressed out because things feel uncertain and uncontrollable and unpredictable. And it's like, well, they are. They're unpredictable. But if we want it to be predictable, then we're going to suffer, right? Or things are radically uncertain. If we want certainty, we're going to suffer because they're not that way. They're just not certain. But yeah, it's yeah.
Mm, beautiful. I can read another quote of yours here. It relates closely with something you just said, but I love this expression of it in the book. You wrote, the moments of life can certainly be viewed from the perspective of being a separate perceiver who is perceiving things. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that vantage point. But there is this other way of encountering what's here, and that is as a seamless whole. We can feel experience as this scintillatingly alive, indivisible presence and appreciate how it's impossible for this presence to be lost. Why? Because it is inclusive of all things. Well said, my friend.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, and the key is to, if when I write something like that, I mean, my uh, those words are I'm not interested in just saying those words. I'm interested in those words being an invitation to someone for someone who's reading them to look and see like, oh wait, so here's this sense of presence, something's present. And in what way is that inclusive of everything? Well, look and see how here's this sense of presence, the presence of the moment, the existence of the moment. And everything that appears in, let's say, what we call, the field of experience, everything that appears, it's what's most fundamental about it is what? It's presence. It's here. So if I'm sitting on a chair, just whatever, just hanging out, or I'm meditating or whatever, and consciousness, is sort of traveling around the field of experience, encountering all these different things, descriptively, it encounters thoughts, it encounters memories and visual images and body sensations, all these names we have for things. What's fundamentally the basis of all of those things is that they're all present. That's what that's what they all share is this presence. And that's what I mean when I say presence is all inclusive. It's like it's inclusive of everything. Everything is presence. And that the presence of what is can't be lost. Presence as an experience, like, oh wow, I'm feeling really present now. That gets lost all the time. I remember trying to hang on to it for dear life. Like, oh God, I feel so present. Oh my God, it feels so great. I'm on another retreat, just grooving on the presence. And then it would go away, seemingly. And then I would be having some other experience that I was labeling as presence has gone away. But of course, that experience was what? Present. And I was like, oh, wow, this is a different presence. And this is the presence I'm interested in, I talk about, which is never goes away. Something is always here, right? And that's presence. And it's unavoidable and inescapable and never departs, the presence of what is. And yeah, that's amazing. Wow, it's always here. Presence is always here.
There was another quote in the book that really struck me. It was related to your mother's passing from this
Mm.
world. I wonder if it's okay with you if I read that one.
Sure.
Okay. Yeah, you wrote, I remember the moment of my mother's passing. The finality was very apparent, like that's it, the end of this remarkable woman's life. At the same time, it was revealed to me that what we think of as the end of a life is, at the same time, pure presence, pure aliveness. I saw quite clearly that what we call death is actually the movement and fullness of life. I can recall being so struck by that, feeling the way in which death is essentially the same as life. They are each this same mystery, this same miracle of unending fullness. And from that perspective, I could see that nothing was actually lost in that moment of death, much as the fullness of the sea is not lost when a wave returns from whence it came. The instant is constantly dying, even as the fullness remains what it is, indestructible.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. It's like here is the fullness of reality that is appearing in all the different distinct, creative ways that it seems to appear as each instant different from the next instant. Um, and ordinarily, our attention is very preoccupied with how it seems to be appearing and the way we're describing that appearance. And then we're sort of, and then out of that way that we're describing it, there's this hierarchy that's essentially created seemingly like this is better than that. This is right. This is more awake than that. This is more valuable than that, which is, one vantage point on life for sure. And it's got its own validity, as a vantage point. Um, like some of my relationships feel more valuable than other relationships. They feel more important to me, like with my daughter. It just feels like has a certain weight to it. Um, but there's another vantage, which is where we kind of do this little orientation shift from what we think is appearing just to the sheer fact of the appearing itself. And it's sort of like shifting from how the images are appearing onto the screen to the light that's creating all the appearing, right? So something is appearing here, and yes, that looks different from that, and this feels different from that. And birth, to come back to the death question, like what we call birth is an appearance of reality. Like here's birth, what we call birth, the beginning of a life appears, and what we call death, the end so-called of a life appears. And that's what I mean by them, life and death essentially being the same. They're both appearances. They're both, and when I say appearance, I'm not making it sound like it's not really there. Somehow it's just appearing to be there. It's like, no, it's there as reality appearing. All there is appearing. There's nothing but appearing. In that sense, everything is real. Um, but but feeling the way in which, and I remember my mom's at the moment of her passing was like a really powerful confirmation of that moment that we call the end of a life was shockingly alive, shockingly radiant. Shocking in the sense of like, yes, it was an end of a life from one perspective, but in that moment was pure potency of reality shining forth as what we call death. And in that sense, there's always just the shining forth, whether we call it birth, whether we call it a life, whether we call it the end of that life, it's all radiant, shining forth, the shining forth of this inexplicable miracle that, I mean, and when I say inexplicable miracle, I really mean that, right? I mean, it's like, how is there anything? How does this, how is this getting here at this moment? You know, where's it coming from? I mean, there's no answers to those questions. No, there never would be an answer to that question. How can we, but here it is, you know, and, um, there's a lot of talk in spirituality about, finding equanimity, coming to a place where we're more at peace with what is. And it's like, and the answer to that, the discovery of that is in finding the sameness of everything, the equalness of everything, that everything is the appearing of life, including death, what we call death. And, um, which doesn't, I mean, interestingly, it doesn't, all that we're talking about here, seeing that there's just one thing here, there's no separation, there's no, in that sense, there's no individuals really. It just appears that there are. It doesn't, it sounds like it's negating that whole realm of individuality and separation and things interacting with other things, but it doesn't. Like all of that is what's appearing and can be experienced as that. I mean, I can experience you as an individual who has a different life than me and a different set of experiences than me. Like that's there, but that's just not the whole story, as it turns out.
Hmm. And I imagine on the human level, when your mom passed, there were probably very human experiences of grief and emotion that accompanied that, and those were fully included too. And I wonder if you could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, that absolutely. Like, the experience of the loss of that and the experience of the, um, I mean, she was a remarkable woman. And, yeah, I mean, that's part of life. It's experiencing this, we're all going to lose everything eventually, but we're going to lose loved ones and we're going to probably lose capacities as we grow older. And, um, so yeah, from one vantage, absolutely. And, but it's again, it's not the only vantage. And, um, it's, feeling that way in which even in the context of things being lost, we never, the fullness of life is never lost. And there's something about seeing that rather than being a negation of the human experience, it feels like there's almost like, not permission isn't the right word, but it feels like we don't have to hold back the human experience. We don't have to defend against it or protect ourselves from the human experience because there's more a recognition that, um, I remember when I was grieving another loss. It was not my mom's passing, but there was a sense that it was very difficult. But I knew that the experience of grief wasn't any kind of threat. It wasn't anything I needed to stop from happening. I could just fully like let it rip because, and I think while it could have looked from the outside like, well, this needs to stop. It's like, it's too much. It's like, yeah, in one sense it was too much, but in another sense it was, it was the cosmos. And from that perspective, it's another way life is expressing itself. I mean, literally, not just conceptually. It's like viscerally, this sense of like, um, I don't know, it's almost like touching the non-problematic nature of everything when you see that, that it's, uh, I mean, what makes it a problem anyway? Some experience. It's like, well, I mean, I guess generally we say if it's something that seems to be causing suffering. Um, but I mean, so much of the suffering comes out of wanting it to be other than it is, right? Pretty much.
Yeah, well said. Um, as I mentioned, you and I are both appreciators of Peter Brown's
Mhm.
work, and
Indeed.
one of the things I appreciate most about Peter's work is the all inclusivity, which we've been talking a lot about here, of what he points to. For
Yeah.
Peter, this radiant presence is fully inclusive of all its endless modes, flavors, dimensions, perspectives, textures, and so forth. And I love this quote from Peter. I thought I'd read it and see what it brings up for you.
Hmm.
The important fact is that all these different dimensions, all these different perspectives on the radiance are all of the same value. They're all true. They're all real. They're all actual. There are ways that this can seem to be. There's no hierarchy of value. This is better than that. That's better than this. And becoming familiar with the range of these modes and just letting your awareness be free to drift among them and find its own center of gravity is what freedom looks like. This is the yoga of radiant presence, exploring this that is here.
Yeah. It's we were talking earlier about, that sense of coming home. And it's like, yeah, it's like it's coming to see that within any perspective, you can you can come to realize it's home. There's not like more home in certain perspectives because all the perspectives are it's shining, right? Reality's shining. Now we might have preferences for certain. This is a curious thing that uh, was just came up in a recent conversation that even as you discover the equalness of everything, that all the perspectives are equal, they're all fundamentally reality. It My own preferences remain for certain versions of the reality over others. Like I kind of have a preference for these kind of conversations because I find them very enriching and just so delicious. Say maybe over other kinds of conversations, but or I prefer certain kinds of music over other kinds of music. It's just even as I can recognize it's all music, it's all vibration, it's all life. Um, so that's an interesting thing that preferences don't necessarily go away, but seeing the equalness of it all is a kind of freedom, right? Because when we suddenly find ourselves, and this is what often happens, we find ourselves in certain states, seemingly, or certain perspectives, um, and then again we imagine something's been lost, and so we're like trying to crawl our way out of that perspective or out of that experience to get to a better one. Well, that by any measure is a good definition of suffering, right? Because we're trying to get somewhere else. And that doesn't feel like home when we're trying to get we're trying to get back to something that we think is. And that's the difference, the kind of recognition that we can still seek out. I say there's sort of these two approaches to well-being. One is to seek out the things that you associate with well-being, the kinds of relationships you enjoy, the kinds of work you enjoy, the kinds of pastimes you enjoy, the kinds of foods you enjoy, and on, curating kind of a life of well-being. And that's very much based on these preferences, essentially, like things that I associate more with what I want. And that's fine. I think we'll all do that till our final breath, and to some extent, it seems natural. Um, we seek pleasure over pain, for example, right? To put a blunt point on it. Um, and simultaneous with that, we can also come to see more and more that whether the preferences are being realized or not, all is well, like fundamentally. Because sometimes shit happens. Things don't go the way we'd like them to go in a human way, right? Um, Not infrequently, we don't get what we want, seemingly. Things don't go according to plan, and on and on and on it goes. And we can experience whatever we experience in the face of that. But at the same time, there can be this knowing that uh, you could say the transcendent perspective, which is uh, nothing's ever lost. Nothing can be lost. There's no things to be lost. There's just this inconceivable, unresolvable effulgence that is the very basis of everything. And no matter what it looks like, it is this transcendent effulgence. And but like you said, and then that quote said, it's inclusive of all the perspectives. So it's never lost when we're in any particular experience or perspective. That fundamental ground can't be lost. And seeing that just, I don't know, it's life changing, life altering.
Yeah, and I love this phrase, center of gravity, that he would use. Like, you're free to drift among the full range of modes, experiential modes, and just find your own natural center of gravity. I found that
Yeah.
so freeing because, again, it goes back to this,
Yeah.
the carrots on the stick and so many spiritual teachings that make you feel like your goal is to basically imitate whoever the teacher is, and your goal is to replicate their state and their center of gravity, and your reality should look exactly like theirs. Or when my experience is like that guy's, that's when I'll know freedom, rather than like, actually, I do have my own, my own individuality in a sense, my own uniqueness, my own flavor, and actually all the flavors are fully it. So if I'm in a phase of life where I'm called to be more grounded and more human and just relate to my 3-year-old daughter on a very human level, that's fully it. And there's nothing wrong with that
Absolutely.
being my,
Absolutely.
natural flow or center of gravity at that time.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and that's, you know, look, we can have experiences and insights and discover, that the emptiness of this, the transcendental, unresolvable nature of it, and we can see that, and um, and yet this world of seeming resolvability, call it the world of form, that includes like being a father of a daughter, to use that example, as I am as well. It's like, wow, it's really beautiful to play in that world, like, if you will, to experience that. Like, wow, what an amazing thing to get to experience these seeming forms. Like, I love it. Sometimes it's really challenging too. That seems to be part of the package deal of the world of form. But um, yeah, it's not a mistake. It's how reality dances as something, including us. And so yeah, I mean, yeah, it's just, it seems like, again, coming back to one of your first questions about like why would we even engage in these kinds of inquiries. All I can say is that uh, there seems to be, as we explore the infinite nature of this, that the way in which it transcends all of our ideas, uh, which in a sense is transcending all the forms without negating them, we really are starting to tap into and that much more able to appreciate the unending, richness of this, the lusciousness of it, the juiciness of it, the miracle of it, the unfathomable nature of it. And that's, to say that's life enhancing is just not saying it strongly enough, right? It's like, I mean, it's the difference of looking at something and feeling like there's nothing to really look at there and it's meaningless and without much value or beauty, and then looking at it again and realizing you're looking at God. You're looking at the creation, the creative force of the universe in that tiny little seemingly insignificant piece of dirt on the ground or whatever it might be. It's like, no, it's like, wow, well, that's a very different way to perceive it. They're both equally valid perspectives. Oh, that's just a meaningless piece of dirt. Doesn't have any bearing on my life. Why pay it any attention? Cool. I don't have to pay it any attention. I can still live a relatively happy, fulfilling life. But there's this opportunity if we're curious to take a look again at our experiences and discover like everything is just drenched with, well, and every wave is the entirety of the sea. So in that little piece of dirt on the ground is the cosmos, all the laws of the universe there, all of the inexplicable miracle of life is right there appearing as a piece of dirt on the sidewalk. And well, that then becomes this, you talk about an enriching way to perceive reality. It's like, oh my God. As a teacher of mine once said, it's like a treasure chest, but it has no bottom. And it almost gets to a certain point where it's like, well, how much do you want to enjoy it? Because the enjoyment can be endless just by looking at what's actually there and realizing its boundless nature.
Hmm. Beautifully said, John. I know we need to draw to a close pretty soon here. Maybe that's a good note to end on. I think that was a
Feels like it.
beautiful
the
statement.
the endless treasure trove of each moment. Like that's pretty good. It's a good news.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great spot to end, my
Yeah.
friend. So thank you so much. It was, yeah, amazing to talk to you today.
Thanks, Jordan. Yeah, it's a joy to talk with you. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, take good care.